Chup chup simbe, chup chup simbe, simbe tang li tang, simbe tang li tang.
To boil it down, modern slavery is when one person or organisation treats another person as if they owned them. It's not legal today to own someone as property as it was several centuries ago, but unfortunately people still behave as if they have the powers of ownership over other people.
That's New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner Dr. James Cocaine, and this is episode 4 of Palmed Off. In this special series of Follow the Money, the Australia Institute investigates the plight of workers who come to Australia under the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Program, known as PALM. I'm Morgan Harrington. The problems have become so bad that they have led to concerns that the PALM scheme is facilitating modern slavery. In 2024, Dr. Cocaine's office released a report about modern slavery.
The common story here is you have a vulnerable person being exploited because the institutional safeguards that should be protecting them are not working properly. And that allows a company or a dodgy labour hire operator or an individual to take advantage of their vulnerability and treat them as if they own them, control their movement, usually not through physical shackles, usually through psychological, contractual shackles, manipulating vulnerable people into thinking that they owe a lot more money than they do and are being forced to work it off in a way where they'll never repay it and they'll be trapped in bondage, manipulating them through fraud about the kind of work that they're going to be doing. And then people discover, once they've actually taken on a job, that they're unable to leave on any kind of reasonable terms.
I asked Dr. Cocaine what problems he sees with the PALM scheme.
Well, the PALM scheme is a really important scheme for the well-being of Australia's economy, frankly. But in a minority of cases, people have a bad time at work or in their living situation around work, and for one reason or another disengage with the program. What happens then is that because they lose access to supports, because they're not well embedded in local community, they can become vulnerable to exploitation very, very quickly, and things can really go south.
So you've talked about a small minority. About how many people have disengaged from the program?
Well, we don't have a good figure on that, and that in itself is a problem, isn't it? That we don't actually know exactly how many people have disengaged from the program and where they are and what their needs might be and how we could create incentives for them safely to come back into the program or otherwise get supports. But we're probably looking at least several thousand.
In the previous episodes, we've looked at the reasons people leave their employer and take their chances living in Australia without a visa. This is called disengagement, and thousands of people have done it. In this episode, we'll explore some of the solutions to these problems.
We know that there have been hundreds, if not more, of disengaged workers just in one area of New South Wales over the last year or so. This is an area around the Riverina in the southwest, near Griffith, in particular around a community called Leeton.
I travelled to Leeton, where I spoke to the people who are supporting these disengaged former PALM workers, including Paul Matham, who was Mayor of Leeton for 16 years.
Remember, the PALM is a structured scheme. The failings of PALM should be addressed by the PALM hierarchy. That's how it should be, because that's come from there. They didn't just wander out here on a boat and land in Australia and say, here we go, and see how we go. They can be under a structured scheme.
Paul's colleague Ken has spent years advocating for PALM workers.
What we need to do now is account for the human lives that are toiling in neighbourhoods, in communities, undocumented, lawfully working, and never having a clear path out of their dilemma. That's what we need to sort. We need to sort the urgent problem that disengagement is presenting to communities.
Paul and Ken both want an amnesty for disengaged workers.
And that's what we have to do. We have to do better. First off, we have to look at the PALM scheme and get that working right here. But the other aspect is for those that are disengaged, they're all out there now. And I believe that we should have an amnesty that would probably go for maybe 6 months while we get our house in order.
You have to understand, when someone disengages from the program, we have no funding base to take care of their needs. And so someone will definitely have to work. They will be working unlawfully, and then their wages will not be recorded in the formal systems, including tax. So then think about the grander amalgamated consequences around lost tax income for the host country, and that's Australia. And you have this multiplicity of consequences, which if you try and get your head around, the only reasonable way out is to grant an amnesty, regularize the stay, case by case. All I'm saying is that largely, those individuals just looking to work lawfully, to access opportunities, an amnesty is the only way out of their situation.
Dr. Matt Withers from the ANU agrees. He spent his career studying temporary migration programs in Australia and around the world.
I think an amnesty for disengaged workers is absolutely essential. We are at a point where there are entire regions of Australia's economy which are being serviced by disengaged palm workers. This is absolutely rife and endemic to our agricultural production, and those workers are acutely vulnerable because most don't have any access to private or public healthcare. They do not have the ability to return home and connect with their families without invalidating their current visa status, and are extraordinarily vulnerable to exploitation amongst irregular labour brokers and employers.
But any potential amnesty is clearly not the end of the story.
However, for an amnesty to be put in place, I think it's important to reform the PALM scheme in such a way that actually prevents the kinds of issues which are causing people to disengage in the first instance. An amnesty is unfortunately a band-aid measure for what is effectively a structural problem that is causing workers to disengage from this scheme for very valid reasons. For the PALM scheme to be best practice, I think the most essential thing is to give workers the opportunity to change employers in a genuine way. So that right to change employers is really integral to the functioning of any healthy labour market, and PALM should really be no different to this. To my mind, the first thing which needs to happen is a root and branch reform of the program so that workers do have similar entitlements to other workers in Australia, first and foremost being that right to change employers to avoid exploitative circumstances. But there's a slew of other reforms which should follow after this too.
And this is the fundamental problem with the PALM scheme. Workers are tied to one employer. If they're granted a PALM visa, they can only stay in Australia as long as they work for a so-called approved employer who sponsors their visa. Here's Thomas Costa from Unions New South Wales.
Well, they can't change their employer in the same way you and I can change our employer. They can't just say, look, I'm not happy with where I'm working. I'm just going to resign, give my notice, resign, and then go find another employer. If they want to do it without breaching their visa, they would actually have to find a way in which their employer would firstly allow them to resign without consequence, and another employer would essentially sponsor them for their visa. Doesn't happen very often, very unlikely scenario.
Ultimately, the PALM visa scheme raises a fundamental question. Yes, the scheme can bring benefits to migrant workers, as well as regions and industries in Australia that need their labour. But should Australia really be relying so heavily on temporary migrant workers, let alone denying them basic rights and services?
We don't support a ongoing temporary migrant workforce. It seems that there has been one in Australia now for a couple of decades, almost by stealth. Not just the PALM visa, it's sponsorship visas, international students. There are a lot of visa classes that effectively have been used to create temporary workers in Australia. I don't think a position that the Australian community has endorsed. I think most people would agree that if you're living and working in Australia for a number of years, you should have the right to permanent residency, and you should have the right, if you're paying taxes here and working here for a number of years, to access our social welfare system. They're essentially living here, working here, paying taxes here, but have less rights than citizen workers. And I don't think that is really what Australians consider is fair. And I don't think that is good for our long-term social ethics of how we want our country to be.
There's a lesson I take away from the palm workers I met in Australia and Vanuatu. At the end of the day, this is all about people. Like this woman from the Solomon Islands, sacrificing for her family, trying to get by, and trying to get ahead.
For me, I sent home basically because I have a kid back home. So to help him to buy things and to save up for his future.
I'm Morgan Harrington, and this has been Palmed Off, a special 4-part series of Follow the Money. Palmed Off was written and produced by Morgan Harrington, with production and script advice from Stephen Long. Sound production and engineering by Simon Branthwaite. The song you have heard is Mumbwe from the album Sorusian by Ni Vanuatu artist Tio, with thanks to the Wantok Music Foundation. This podcast was recorded in Canberra, on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples.